want to return to the sort of free speech subject, but to talk about it online, really, because it's been a year this week since Elon Musk took over Twitter, since he sent that bizarre tweet with a picture of him holding a sink inside Twitter HQ with the caption, "Let that sink in." Constantine, I mean, to start off with, sticking with the Middle Eastern theme, he's been accused of essentially allowing disinformation to run riot. I think lots of us have probably seen plenty of AI-generated images about the war coming from both sides. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Is it all bad? Have we let speech fly too freely online?
I think it's a very complicated and nuanced issue, and it's a work in progress. I definitely think that, certainly from my experience, I can tell you, I see way more anti-Semitism on X than I did a year ago. I'm actually very comfortable with that. I always said that would happen. When you open up the conversation, you are allowing people who have unpleasant ideas and things to say them. I prefer that to the restrictiveness and censorship that we had before, even if at times it may be personally uncomfortable for me. In terms of the disinformation, I think, as I say, it's a transitionary period when we are confronted by the rapid emergence of AI and the ability to generate things that look and seem realistic. And also what you're seeing is the monetization of Twitter or of X has created incentives that are much more powerful than the ones we had before. Before it was, I want 400,000 followers. Now it's like, I want 400,000 followers because I can make a living from this. And therefore you see people, I quote tweeted a guy who has over, I think 1.5 million Twitter followers and makes money from Twitter, who posted a video of American soldiers landing in Israel, allegedly, and about to invade Lebanon or something. Yeah. And it turned out it was a video from 2002, and American soldiers arriving in Romania. And this was seen by millions of people. So it's an issue. I do actually think that they will work it out. I think many of the changes that have happened on Twitter have been very positive. So I think it's a mixed bag. I think in terms of, whatever hate speech is, if such a thing exists, I've never really had that much of a problem with it. I block people who say hateful things that I don't like. I think that's a perfectly usable mechanism. I'm comfortable with that. They should be allowed to say what they think. The disinformation, misinformation thing is a different conversation. I think that community notes has actually been an incredible invention that has completely changed the way that we treat that issue. And maybe, one of the things I've suggested is maybe if you continue to post things that get community noted over and over, that is somehow reflected when people come to your tweets and your profile. So it's like an Uber rating. Oh, this guy's just posting rubbish all the time. And then you stop using them. You stop consuming their content. I think, and I suspect that's probably what will happen. I would certainly hope so. However, I will say this. I am very optimistic that Elon's takeover of Twitter is a positive change in the social media landscape. As a friend of mine is fond of saying, 0 is a special number. When you had 0 social media big tech platforms that had a more open stance on free speech, it meant that we had a complete lock on information that was allowed to be discussed. The Overton window narrowed massively. I think the fact that they took away the blue ticks from, there was situations where somebody with 2,000 followers would have a blue tick because they happened to, make coffee at the New Statesman, and somebody who's actually a legitimate journalist with hundreds of thousands of followers would have no sort of reputational approval because they happen to work in a new media organization like yours or like ours.
Yeah, we had no blue tick.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Not
for one of trying.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think what has happened is that has taken away the legacy media's lock on authority over information. That has negative trade-offs like the ones we've just discussed, but I also think it has very positive ones. I see Elon as a problem solver. I think he will be conscious that it's a problem. And I'm quite optimistic that there are going to be changes going forward. So I think I'm pleased the takeover happened. It's a mixed bag so far. I am optimistic that over time, many more problems will be addressed, and we're going to have a better balance of openness and, censor as well.
Yeah. Tom, Often the accusation of disinformation, misinformation is coming from the mainstream media, places like the BBC. I'm thinking of Mariana Spring in particular. Don't these people have a bit of a nerve telling other people that they're not telling the truth?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when you hear people from the BBC and the New York Times say that accounts that spread disinformation and misinformation should be booted off of Twitter, they should be careful what they wish for, given what we've seen over the course of the past couple of weeks. They're essentially handed Hamas press releases about the bombing of that hospital, and they just repeated it verbatim in their live blogs. There was a fascinating piece in the New Statesman, funnily enough, by Lewis Goodall from the News Agents podcast. You might have seen it.
Centrist dads.
Yeah, the kind of smug centrist trio sort of thing, which has become quite popular, unfortunately. He made the point that it's such a tragedy that we're going through these wars now with social media, because it's not like the last time that we had a set of wars where all you had was the government and the BBC. Wasn't that a brilliant time? Alistair Campbell would create a document laying out the perfect truth and then deliver it to Andrew Marr to read out to the nation. So I think social media obviously comes with problems and all sorts of things that we need to tackle. It's also become a tremendous tool for challenging misinformation, in the form of community notes, in other things. There is still the problem of echo chambers. I think we see that expressed, as Constantine was gesturing to earlier, with those filmed exchanges of those scumbags ripping those posters down saying, where's your evidence? That's misinformation. That hasn't happened. So that is clearly a problem. But at the same time, it's very obvious to me that censorship is not the answer to that particular problem. And what I think's been interesting about Musk's experiment is that there are obviously all kinds of things a platform could do in a pro-free speech fashion to deal with these things by devolving powers down to the users, by allowing them to become the people who are answering back rather than someone sat in a room somewhere in San Francisco deciding what's true and what isn't. Why are we not exploring more of that across the internet, really, rather than just constantly seeing censorship and deferring to these mainstream institutions which have failed us time and again? Clearly, that's obviously not worked well for us. And
Naya, do you think sometimes the charge of disinformation just means I don't agree with that?
Yeah, I think that is undoubtedly some of the time that happens. And I think some points have been alluded to there. But I think when it comes to the war, we have seen in the last couple of weeks, as Tom alluded to, that social media can become a powerful tool for having counter information to the narrative that is pushed in particular institutions, and actually social media function to put pressure on the BBC and other organisations to report things in a more accurate and a more balanced way. But I also do agree with Constantine. I do think it is a work in progress. I undoubtedly do see a lot more racist content on Twitter than I saw a couple of years ago. And on top of that, with the fog of war and the complexities of war, there's obviously narrative warfare going on, where lots of people are amplifying information that they think will affirm their pre-existing narrative. And there's all sorts of other things, but that's a user experience issue that hopefully Elon Musk is going to be aware of and would want to deal with. So I do think that the whole concept of disinformation, as we saw with the pandemic, was often used as a way to essentially shut down any kind of disagreement. But at the same time, we can see that there is such a thing as information that is false, that is pushed within certain platforms. And we have seen that with the war as well. So I do think there's nuance and complexity there. But I think it will be very interesting now as we go towards not just the next election in the UK, but the US election, given that that was very much part of the tactics of the previous owners of social media. And that was the laptop and all the other things around Joe Biden and his son and Donald Trump. They will not have that ability to do the same thing again under Elon Musk. And hopefully we'll actually have a much more freer way of engaging in an election via social media.
Yeah, that's actually what I wanted to ask you about, Rakib. I mean, I think it's worth sort of looking back just over a year ago, what Twitter and other social media companies were up to, censoring the laptop story, banning people for saying, referring to a transgender woman as he, for instance. Those were the kind of things that were being shut down. Now it feels like we can have a more open conversation, even if there are some, nastier elements around the side.
Oh, no, of course. And actually, if you open up the conversation, you may well be at risk of facing more abuse. I mean, I've been called a far-right hack, Islamist infiltrator, and a communist all in one day. So
proud to be
a broad portfolio.
But I think if you want to be an active player on social media platforms, unfortunately, it does come with the territory. And for me, it's war off a duck's back. Of course, if he's getting to the stage where, for example, women are facing, threats of misogynistic violence, then I think that is different territory. But overall, of course, I think when you're looking at disinformation and misinformation, I'm far more worried about the BBC's coverage of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It hasn't covered itself in glory at all. And that's our national public broadcaster. And I think that's another institution perhaps is also too big to succeed. I think that in many of these public sector institutions, which are incredibly large, there just seems to be far too many people that they don't take their basic duties and responsibilities seriously at all. And I think another institution would be the NHS, for example. And I think that's a very serious issue. They don't take pride in really prioritizing their bread and butter responsibilities. And in BBC's case, you have to be very considered. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is incredibly loaded. Emotions are highly charged. That's when you need the BBC to be really, it needs to take its responsibilities particularly seriously when it comes to this conflict in particular. I think more generally, though, I think social media it's been a great source of good in the sense of really acting as a check and balance in a way on those institutions when they are clearly underperforming, woefully underperforming. So of course, my fellow panelists have said it's a work in progress. I like the idea of people get continuously community noted. They have a bad rating on their profile, so people stray away from them in terms of digesting and taking their content seriously.
Your opinions are rubbish. 2 stars. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a very decent idea.
But it's not your opinions are rubbish. It's the incorrect fact.
Yeah, or it's the fact that you're willing to amplify content without, not taking it seriously, not approaching that content in a considered way.
Konstantin, so we're all pretty much agreed that it's a good thing that Twitter or X, I keep forgetting to call it X. It's just not going to catch on, is it?
No.
I'm going to call it Twitter. Sorry, Elon.
I'm sure he's listening.
We're taking, big fan. He's right at the back. We're taking 1 step forward and 2 steps back, though. Certainly in the UK, certainly in Europe, where so we have a freer social media platform, but now we've just passed the Online Safety Act. Europe is going to pass a similar
Digital Services
the Digital
Act,
Services
and
Act.
in Ireland, etc. I actually just wanted to pick up on, I think, what was a very, very good point that both Tom and Rakib made, which is, I don't know that the BBC would be calling Hamas a terrorist organization today if we didn't have social media. I think the opportunity to challenge mainstream narratives that are incorrect via social media is actually a tremendous opportunity, and it's a democratization of information that I think has been tremendously beneficial to our society. It comes with costs, ones we've already discussed. In terms of online controls, I think, sadly, I've always said that I think the idea of the wild, wild west of the internet, which I was fortunate enough to enjoy because I'm 40 now, I think that young people will never see a free internet again. I don't think that's going to happen. And one of the reasons is the technology is very powerful. It is very, very powerful. And so if I can start a riot from my phone, you can see why governments would start to get involved in that. I think thanks to the great work of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young and Silky Carlo, Big Brother Watch, and lots of other people raising this issue, the teeth have been taken out somewhat of the online safety bill. I'm not saying it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And I actually think sometimes we talk about this issue and we imagine that the people who are attempting to restrict what we say and see on the internet are these evil, tyrannical authoritarians. I actually think it's much worse than that. And I have some experience of this. If I may just take a moment. The last time I was on Question Time, people don't know this, but when you do Question Time, they don't put out all the program. The first question isn't released to the public. And people are more relaxed and they say things perhaps sometimes they wouldn't say on a broadcast. And the first question at that particular moment was Donald Trump had just been unbanned from Facebook. And Fiona Bruce went around the panel. I made the somewhat uncontroversial point, in my opinion, that the leader of the biggest and most powerful country in the world should be able to speak in public.
Outrageous.
Got no response at all from the audience. And then they went around eventually to the Labour woman who said, banging the table, "We must have the safest internet in the world." And what, safer than North Korea? And my point is, it's worse than a tyrannical authoritarian approach because these people are doing it for our own good. And they don't understand that safety comes with trade-offs, i.e. loss of freedom. So the problem we are fighting is these people are well-intentioned. And I think it's the C.S. Lewis quote that a tyranny exercised for the benefit of its victims is the worst of all, because the people who torment us for our own good will torment us forever because they do so with the approval of their own conscience. So we have to, the main thing I think we have to do going forward is to try reintroduce into the public conversation the very idea that there are no solutions, only trade-offs. This is a quote I'm accused of abusing by everybody because Thomas Sowell is brilliant. But that is, I think, actually how we are ever going to make progress on this issue, is if we get back to the idea that when we increase safety, we reduce freedom often, and because otherwise we're never going to win the argument.